got X-Men.
Okay. Hi there, and welcome. This is the Andersons' home in St. Lazare, Quebec, and I decided to make a short video on us making our maple syrup. We've been doing it for about 10 years now, and back in 2003 we actually won Grand Champion maple syrup at the Royal Agricultural Winter Fair in Toronto. Since then we've either been disqualified or not really placed very well, so a lot of luck involved. By the way, that was our second year entering. Anyway, the reason we're doing this, when I put on Facebook that I was tapping the trees last week, my cousin Joy said she would love to come out here for a field trip with her class. However, since they live in the Comox Valley on Vancouver Island, that's not very practical, so I thought maybe I'd make this quick film, and they might find that maybe a little bit interesting. So, it's a bright sunny day here. It's beautiful. It's about 9 degrees, and the trees only flow sap in the springtime when the temperatures generally fall below freezing at night and when it warms up above freezing in the daytime. That can happen in the fall, and the trees can flow some sap then, but I don't know anybody that actually produces it. So the first thing that we're going to look at here is the trees that we have and what makes a good maple sugar producing tree. Most of the trees that you see behind me are maple trees. There's maybe one or two others. But most of the trees that we have here on our property are maple trees, and there's a few evergreen hemlock trees. So now, how do we tell which trees are maple? There's commonly here, there are sugar maples and there are red maples, and you can make syrup from both of them. But the sugar maples are the best. They put out a sap that has a higher percentage of sugar in it, and they have a little bit better flavor than the red maples. So far, we've only tapped the sugar maple trees. Here on our property, we have about 30 sugar maple trees, and we put in about 37 or 38 taps late every winter, early in the spring, when it looks like the weather is going to cooperate for making syrup. The simplest way to tell a sugar maple is to look at the leaves. You know how a maple leaf in sort of might resemble our hand? Well, a sugar maple leaf, the notch between the lobes of the leaves is rounded on a sugar maple. On a red maple, it's a sharp V shape like that. That's the simplest way to tell. And so one fall, back when we started, we went around while there were still leaves on the trees and identified the sugar maples. And those are the ones that we tap most of the time to make syrup with. Tapping a tree, we put in a little spout like this that's called a tap. We drill a 7/16 inch hole about 1 1/4 inches into the wood, and that is the part of the tree where the sap flows up in the spring. And you can see the sap dripping there slowly. It's a pretty good day. The tap we insert into the tree so that it's just snug, and when the sap is flowing it drips out, and then we collect it in these buckets. And later in the season we tend to get a lot heavier sap flows than we do early, but they'll drip, and it's amazing how even with slow drips you can collect quite a bit of sap over the course of a day or two. Here on the tree, Danielle's going to give you a close-up, here on the tree are some old tap holes. There's one right there. Okay, see how it's healed over? No, here. There's an old tap hole right there, the round hole, and it's healed over. And it takes about a year for the tree to heal over directly when we take the tap out after we've done. Up here, there's last year's tap hole right there. And that one's dried up now, and it'll heal over probably by the middle of the summertime here. Okay, so that's what we mean by tapping trees. Now, how do we know? You can see that this tree has two buckets on it. And some of the ones over behind only have one. The larger the tree is, the more we can put in more taps safely without hurting the tree. It's estimated that about 1.5% of the sap that flows up the tree in total in the springtime comes out and into the buckets. So it's a very small amount of the sap that flows up the tree completely. And so it doesn't do any damage. So trees up to about 18 inches in diameter, we will put one tap, one bucket in. And if they're between 18 inches and 30 inches, we'll put 2 buckets in. We have a couple of trees that we could put 3 in, but we don't do that. 2 we think is plenty, and that gives us lots of sap to boil. My daughter Danielle, one of the treats that we like in the spring, even before we make syrup, is to drink the sap out of the tree. It's called sweet water here in Quebec quite often, and it's a very tasty treat with lots of sugar, about 1.5% sugar in it, and some minerals and things. Hey, not all of it. We got to make syrup. She likes it a lot. And yeah, we can just drink this just like water, and it's actually very refreshing, very tasty, and it's part of our quality control program to make sure that we're getting good sap out of the trees, right?
Yes, also mentally.
Yeah, it's good for our psyche, she says. All right. Okay, so when there's enough sap in the buckets to actually do a boil, I go around with 5-gallon pails and collect it and bring it over here to our, well, we don't have a very fancy sugar shack or evaporator shack, but we make do. So I bring it here. We filter it into, just run it through a filter to get out any big chunks of wood or bark, whatever that might be in there. And we put it into these big pots, and with a couple of propane burners, we boil it down. And it takes, for us here, it takes 32 gallons of sap to make 1 gallon of finished syrup. So about 32 to 1 is about the ratio that we get. Our trees have pretty good sugar content. So here's it's boiling and making steam. And this can take, 8 or 10 hours to get it boiled down to the right spot. So we boil the sap down from about 1.5% dissolved solids in the actual sap to the point where in the finished syrup it's between 66 and 67% dissolved solids, and that's what makes it syrup. The sweetness is most of that, the sugar is most of that, and then the other minerals and flavor components in the syrup make up the remainder of those dissolved solids. And when you have good trees, and when you take good care, boiling it down and skimming off the foam and keeping it clean, then you end up with a good, tasty maple syrup that we love to have on pancakes and waffles and things like that. So when we are done boiling it, we get the density to the right spot. We run it through a filter again, and we can it, mostly in mason jars. And we end up with this lovely amber-colored syrup. This is an extra light grade, which is the finest grade of syrup. There's extra light, and dark as well. And the dark sometimes has stronger flavors. The extra light tends to have a little more maple flavor in it. But in any event, this is the finished product. We end up with about 8 gallons each year. And most of our family, well, us and our family gets to eat that. Okay? Hope you found that somewhat interesting.